The sun was setting over a quiet suburban street, casting a golden glow across the neighborhood. Inside a bustling McDonald's, the familiar aroma of fries and burgers filled the air, a comforting backdrop to the usual clatter of trays and hum of conversation. For most of the workers, it was just another long shift, a blend of routine tasks and fleeting interactions with customers. But for one employee, it was a day that would change everything. She was young, hardworking, and always had a smile that could light up even the busiest drive-through rush. Let's call her Emma. Emma had a heart bigger than the world around her. Despite her minimum-wage job and long hours, she believed in small acts of kindness. She saw it as a way to bring some light to those who needed it most, especially on the darker days. The McDonald's where Emma worked was no stranger to the struggles of the community. Homelessness wasn't just a statistic here. It was visible, real, and heartbreakingly close. Emma had grown accustomed to seeing kids with tired eyes and tattered clothes lingering nearby, hoping for some warmth or food. It tugged at her heart every single time. On this particular day, the dinner rush was winding down, and the surplus of unsold food began piling up in the back. Burgers, nuggets, fries. Perfectly good meals destined for the trash because of company policy. Emma had seen this waste time and time again, but today something was different. As the clock ticked closer to closing, Emma noticed a small group of kids huddled outside near the window. They weren't playing or laughing like kids usually do. Instead, they looked cold, hungry, and out of place. Emma couldn't ignore the ache in her chest any longer. She decided to do something she'd been quietly contemplating for weeks. With a quick glance to ensure no one was watching, Emma packed up some of the untouched leftovers into bags. Her hands trembled, not from fear of breaking the rules, but from the weight of what those rules meant. She stepped outside, her breath visible in the crisp night air, and walked over to the kids. "Here," she said softly, handing them the food. Their eyes widened, a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "Thank you, miss," one of them whispered. It was a moment so simple, yet so profound. Emma felt a warmth in her heart she hadn't felt in a long time. But what Emma didn't know was that someone was watching. Not a manager, not a coworker, but someone whose presence would turn this quiet act of kindness into something much bigger than she ever imagined. The following morning, as Emma walked into work, everything seemed normal until it wasn't. Her manager's stern voice called her into the office, and her stomach dropped. What happened next would send shockwaves through her life and ripple far beyond the walls of that McDonald's. What Emma thought was just a small, compassionate gesture would soon ignite a storm of controversy, forcing everyone to question where the line is drawn between following the rules and doing what's right. Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started, and trust me, the twist will leave you speechless. Emma sat in the manager's cramped office, her heart racing and palms sweating as she tried to piece together what could have gone wrong. She replayed the events of the previous night in her mind. Surely, giving food to those kids wasn't a crime, was it? She hadn't stolen anything. It was all leftovers, food that would have ended up in the trash anyway. But the cold, unyielding expression on her manager's face told her this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "Emma," he started, his voice calm but heavy with authority, "do you know why you're here?" She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. I don't think I do," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Her manager sighed and leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "We received a complaint," he said, his tone sharp. "Someone reported seeing you take food from the restaurant and give it away last night. Is that true?" Emma froze. Her throat felt dry, and her mind raced for an explanation. She wanted to defend herself, to explain the situation, but she also knew the company had strict policies about waste. Employees were forbidden from taking or distributing leftover food, even if it meant throwing it away. She swallowed hard. "Yes, it's true," she admitted. "But it was just leftovers, food we weren't going to use. There were some kids outside, and they looked hungry. I thought." Her voice trailed off as she saw the stern look on her manager's face harden even further. "Emma, I understand you were trying to help," he said, cutting her off. "But we have policies for a reason. Once the food is marked as waste, it's no longer ours to give away. It's a liability issue. What if one of those kids got sick? The company could be held responsible." Emma felt a knot of frustration build in her chest. Liability? That's what this was about? She couldn't understand how anyone could value rules and technicalities over basic human decency. She wanted to argue, to plead her case, but she could see that her manager wasn't interested in hearing her side of the story. "This is serious, Emma," he continued. "I have to report this to corporate. Until then, I'm suspending you from your duties, effective immediately." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. Suspended? For feeding hungry kids? She couldn't believe it. As she left the office, her emotions were a storm. Anger, guilt, and confusion swirling together. She had always tried to do the right thing, to make the best of her situation, and now it felt like that kindness had backfired. But the real shock came later that day when Emma's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text from a coworker, followed by another and another. Each one carried the same message: check social media. Curious and a little uneasy, Emma opened her phone and scrolled through her feed. What she saw made her heart stop. A video of her handing food to the kids had gone viral. Someone had recorded her act of kindness from across the parking lot and posted it online with the caption, "McDonald's employee shares leftover food with hungry kids. What a hero!" At first, Emma felt a flicker of relief. Maybe people would understand why she did what she did. But as she kept reading, her relief turned to dread. The comments were a mix of support and outrage. While many praised her for her compassion, others were quick to criticize her actions, accusing her of breaking the rules and jeopardizing her job. And then there were the headlines. News outlets had picked up the story, each one spinning it in a slightly different way. Fast food worker faces suspension after feeding homeless kids. Heartwarming or reckless? McDonald's employee sparks debate. Corporate policy versus human kindness. A controversial act goes viral. Emma couldn't believe how quickly the situation had spiraled out of control. It wasn't just her coworkers who were texting her now. Friends, family, even people she hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out. Some offered words of encouragement, while others asked if the rumors were true. The overwhelming attention made her feel exposed, as if her private life had been put on display for the whole world to judge. As the day went on, the tension only grew. Outside the restaurant, a small group of people had gathered, holding signs that read things like "Feed the hungry," "Not the dumpster," and "Support Emma." It was surreal. Emma had never thought of herself as a hero. She was just a regular person trying to do the right thing. But now, her actions had become a symbol of a much larger issue. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, corporate executives were scrambling to manage the fallout. The video had sparked a heated debate about food waste and corporate responsibility, drawing attention not just to Emma's story but to the broader practices of the fast food industry. Reporters were calling the restaurant, customers were voicing their opinions, and social media was ablaze with hashtags like #JusticeForEmma and #FeedTheHungry. But for Emma, the attention was anything but comforting. She felt like her life was spinning out of control, and she didn't know how to stop it. The viral fame brought more questions than answers. Who had recorded the video? And why? Was it someone trying to support her, or was there another motive? And then there was the bigger question. What would happen next? Emma knew she had broken the rules, but she also knew in her heart that she had done the right thing. Would the world see it that way? Or would she end up losing everything she had worked for? As night fell and the chaos of the day began to quiet down, Emma sat alone in her small apartment, staring at her phone. The notifications kept coming, but she couldn't bring herself to read them anymore. All she could think about were the kids she had helped. She wondered where they were now, if they were safe, if they'd had another meal since then. The uncertainty was suffocating, but one thing was clear. This was far from over. Emma's act of kindness had set something in motion, something much bigger than she ever could have imagined. And somewhere out there, the person who had recorded her was watching it all unfold, knowing they had just changed her life forever, more than bad luck and empty pockets. But there was an understanding between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the hardships they both carried. The diner's door creaked open, and a blast of cold air rushed inside as a couple walked in, chatting quietly. The young man barely noticed. He was too lost in his thoughts. Finally, he spoke again. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Spend your last bit of money on me?" The old man shrugged. "Because once, a long time ago, someone did the same for me." The young man looked at him, waiting for more. But the old man didn't elaborate. He simply stared at his coffee cup, lost in memories that he didn't share. The waitress came by again, refilling the young man's glass of water. She glanced at the old beggar, her gaze softening. "You should eat something too," she said gently. "I can get you a small bowl of soup on the house." The old man shook his head. "I'm all right," he said. But the young man didn't miss the way his fingers twitched slightly, the way his eyes flickered to the plate in front of him before quickly looking away. He was hungry, probably just as much as the young man had been. Without thinking, the young man pushed his plate toward the old man. "Here," he said. "You should finish it." The old beggar looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I know," the young man interrupted. "But I want to." The old man hesitated for only a moment before finally picking up a fry, chewing slowly. The young man watched him, still trying to piece together the mystery of who this man really was. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, the journalist's card still in her hand. She turned it over a few times, her mind a whirlwind of indecision. Every fiber of her being wanted to stay out of the spotlight, to wait for the situation to blow over. But something about the journalist's words lingered in her mind. "You have a chance to make a real difference." She glanced at her phone, which had become a constant source of anxiety. New notifications flashed on the screen, but she couldn't bring herself to check them. Instead, she focused on the faint hum of traffic outside her window, trying to find a moment of peace. But even in the quiet, questions swirled in her mind. What if speaking out only made things worse? What if it cost her her job permanently? And why had that stranger filmed her in the first place? The mystery of the video's origin nagged at her. She replayed the scene from that night in her head. The kids huddled together near the side of the building, their eyes lighting up when she handed them the food. She hadn't noticed anyone watching, but someone clearly had been. Who were they? A customer? A passerby? And why hadn't they stepped forward to explain? As she wrestled with these thoughts, her phone buzzed again, breaking her concentration. This time it was Lisa. "They're making a decision about your job today," the message read. "The district manager is here with corporate. I think you should come by." Emma's heart sank. She wasn't sure she was ready to face her manager, or anyone else for that matter, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. She quickly changed into something presentable, grabbed her bag, and headed out the door. When she arrived at the restaurant, the air felt heavy with tension. Employees glanced at her as she walked in, their expressions a mix of sympathy and curiosity. Lisa met her near the back of the store, pulling her aside. "They're in the office," Lisa whispered. "It's tense. I think they're trying to figure out how to handle all the attention." Emma nodded, her stomach churning. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her as she made her way to the manager's office. She knocked softly, her hand trembling slightly. "Come in," a voice called from inside. As Emma stepped into the room, she was met with the stern faces of her manager, the district manager, and a corporate representative. The tension in this small space was palpable. "Emma," the district manager began, his tone professional but cold, "thank you for coming in. We wanted to speak with you about the events of the past few days." She nodded, unsure of what to say. Her manager motioned for her to sit, and she obliged, feeling like a child being scolded in a principal's office. "We've reviewed the incident and the video that's been circulating," the corporate representative continued, her expression unreadable. "This situation has garnered a lot of attention, both online and in the media. While we understand that your intentions may have been good, your actions violated company policy." Emma braced herself for the worst, but before they could continue, a loud commotion erupted outside the office. The muffled sound of voices grew louder, and Emma could make out snippets of chants, "Justice for Emma," and "Feed the hungry." The corporate representative exchanged a nervous glance with the district manager. "What's going on out there?" she asked. Lisa appeared in the doorway, her face flushed. "There's a crowd outside," she said. "Protesters. They're demanding to speak with someone." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. The attention had reached a boiling point, and now it was spilling over into the restaurant itself. The corporate team looked visibly unsettled, clearly unprepared for the situation. The district manager sighed heavily. "We'll address it after this meeting," he said, dismissing Lisa with a wave of his hand. But Emma couldn't ignore the growing unease in her chest. The voices outside weren't just faceless strangers, they were people standing up for what they believed was right. And as much as she wanted to keep her head down, She couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was bigger than her. The corporate representative cleared her throat, bringing Emma's focus back to the room. As I was saying, she continued, while we cannot condone your actions, we recognize that this situation has raised important questions about our policies and our responsibility to the community. Emma frowned, unsure of where this was going. The representative's words were carefully measured, but they lacked any real sense of accountability. It felt like they were trying to manage the situation rather than address the underlying issues. Therefore, the representative went on, we are considering implementing new initiatives to reduce food waste and support local charities. However, this does not absolve you of the violation of policy. A final decision about your employment will be made soon. Emma felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. They were using her story as a catalyst for change while still punishing her for the very act that had sparked it. It felt hollow, like a calculated move to protect their image rather than a genuine effort to make a difference. Before she could respond, the chanting outside grew louder, and someone banged on the office door. The district manager stood up, his face a mask of irritation. This is getting out of hand, he muttered. Lisa appeared again, looking frazzled. You need to come out here, she said, addressing the district manager. There's someone asking to speak with Emma. They said it's important. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? Was it one of the kids? The person who filmed the video? Or someone else entirely? The district manager sighed, clearly exasperated. Fine, he said. Let's get this over with. Emma followed them out of the office, her pulse quickening with each step. As they stepped into the main area of the restaurant, she was met with a scene that took her breath away. Dozens of people had gathered, holding signs and chanting in support of her. Some were customers, others appeared to be community members, and at the center of it all was a man holding a camera. Emma's eyes locked onto him, and her stomach twisted in recognition. It was the same man who had handed her the business card, the journalist. But what was he doing here now? The room fell silent as he stepped forward, his camera trained on Emma. Emma, he said, his voice calm but commanding, the world wants to hear your side of the story. Are you ready to tell it? Emma froze, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The crowd watched her expectantly, their faces a mixture of hope and determination. This was it, the turning point. Everything she had tried to avoid, everything she had feared, was now staring her in the face. Her mind raced as she considered her options. Speaking up could change everything, for better or worse. But staying silent felt like giving up, like letting the narrative be written by people who didn't know her or her intentions. As she took a deep breath, the tension in the room was electric. Every eye was on her, waiting to see what she would do next. The decision she made now could shape not only her future but also the conversation around food waste, corporate responsibility, and human kindness. And somewhere in the back of the crowd, a figure lingered in the shadows, watching the scene unfold with quiet intensity. Whoever they were, they held a piece of the puzzle that could change everything. But for now, Emma stood there, her breath caught in her throat as the journalist's words echoed in the room. The world wanted to hear her story, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to share it. The faces in the crowd were filled with hope and anticipation, but their collective energy only added to the pressure weighing her down. She scanned the room again, searching for answers, when her eyes landed on the figure lingering at the back of the crowd. The person was partially hidden, their face obscured by a hood. Something about their stance felt intentional, like they were waiting for the right moment to step forward. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they had been watching her for a long time, not just now but maybe even on the night everything started. Emma, the journalist prompted again, pulling her focus back. This is your chance. You can use your voice to make a difference. She swallowed hard and nodded slowly, stepping forward. The crowd parted slightly, making a path for her to stand at the center. The camera was still trained on her, and the weight of its lens felt like it was exposing every inch of her vulnerability. I just wanted to help, Emma began, her voice shaky but sincere. That night, when I saw those kids, I couldn't ignore them. They were hungry, and there was food that was about to be thrown away. It didn't feel right to waste it when I knew it could make a difference for someone. The crowd murmured in agreement, their support giving her a small boost of courage. She continued, I know it went against company policy, but I didn't think about that in the moment. I thought about the kids, about how they must feel sitting out there in the cold, wondering if they'd eat that night. The journalist leaned in slightly, his expression serious. And now, with everything that's happened, do you regret your decision? Emma hesitated. The truth was complicated. She didn't regret helping the kids, but she hated the fallout. The job she'd lost, the scrutiny she'd endured, and the way her life had been upended. Before she could answer, the figure at the back of the room began moving forward, drawing everyone's attention. The hooded person walked with a deliberate pace, and as they approached, Emma's heart raced. When they finally stepped into the light, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was one of the kids from that night. Emma's breath caught as she recognized the boy's face. He looked cleaner and better dressed than he had that evening, but his eyes were the same, filled with a quiet strength that belied his young age. He held something in his hands, a worn notebook, its edges frayed from use. The boy stopped in front of Emma and looked up at her. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma frowned, confused. "Sorry? For what?" "For everything," the boy replied, glancing nervously at the crowd. "I didn't mean for all this to happen. I just wanted to thank you." The room fell silent, everyone hanging on his words. Emma knelt down so she could be at eye level with him. "What do you mean?" she asked gently. The boy held out the notebook. "That night, after you gave us the food, I wrote about it in here," he explained. "I keep a journal, it helps me when things get tough." A few days later, someone found it. "I think they're the ones who filmed you and put it online." Emma stared at the notebook, her mind racing. The video wasn't an accident. Someone had read this boy's words, felt moved enough to track her down, and filmed her without her knowledge. The boy shifted nervously, his small hands clutching the notebook tightly. "I didn't mean for you to get in trouble," he said, his voice trembling. "I just wanted people to know there are good people out there. People like you." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. The boy's words were both heartbreaking and heartwarming. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You have nothing to apologize for. None of this is your fault." The crowd watched in silence, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. The journalist, sensing the gravity of the moment, stepped forward. "This changes everything," he said, his tone serious. "If the video was inspired by this boy's words, then there's more to this story than anyone realized." Emma nodded, still trying to process the revelation. The stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just about her decision to feed those kids or the company's reaction. It was about the ripple effect of one small act of kindness, a ripple that had turned into a wave she could no longer control. But before anyone could say more, the restaurant's front doors burst open, and a new figure entered the scene. This time, it was someone Emma didn't recognize. A tall man in a crisp suit, his expression one of quiet authority. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who wasn't used to hearing the word no. The crowd parted for him as he made his way toward Emma and the boy. The journalist stepped back, his camera still rolling as the man approached. "Emma," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "My name is Andrew. I represent a foundation that focuses on food security and community support. I've been following your story closely." Emma blinked, caught off guard. "A foundation," she repeated, unsure of where this was going. Andrew nodded. "Yes. And after everything I've seen and heard, I believe you've uncovered a much bigger issue. One that needs to be addressed on a larger scale." He turned to the crowd, his voice carrying a sense of urgency. "The problem isn't just about one person breaking company policy. It's about why that policy exists in the first place. It's about how we, as a society, handle food waste and how we treat the most vulnerable among us." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Emma felt a spark of hope. For the first time since this ordeal began, it felt like there might be a way to turn everything around, like this moment could be the start of something bigger than herself. But before she could respond, Andrew's expression grew serious. "However," he continued, "there's one more thing you need to know." The room fell silent again, the tension reaching its peak. Andrew glanced at the boy, then back at Emma. "The person who filmed you that night, they weren't just a random stranger. They had a specific reason for being there." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Andrew hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "The person who filmed you was hired," he said finally. "And they weren't working alone. This situation might be bigger than any of us realized. The revelation hit Emma like a ton of bricks. The room buzzed with whispers and gasps as the crowd tried to process what they just heard. Who had hired the person to film her? And why? The mystery deepened, and with it, the stakes rose higher than ever. Emma felt a mixture of fear and determination. Whatever was happening, she was now in the center of it, and there was no turning back. Emma stood frozen, Andrew's words echoing in her mind. Someone had hired the person who filmed her. Why would anyone do that? The question swirled in her head, but there was no time to dwell. The crowd was buzzing with speculation, and the boy beside her shifted uncomfortably, clutching his notebook tighter. Emma glanced at him, her protective instincts kicking in. Whatever this was, she needed to get to the bottom of it, for both their sakes. Andrew cleared his throat, snapping Emma out of her thoughts. "Emma, I need you to trust me," he said firmly. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened. There's a pattern. Companies, organizations, even individuals being exposed for actions that go against public values. But the motivations behind these exposures aren't always pure." Emma frowned. "Are you saying this was planned? That someone wanted this to happen?" Andrew nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I'm saying. And the reason? It's almost always tied to money or influence. Someone knew that a story like this, one involving a corporate giant like McDonald's, would create a media storm. They wanted the outrage, the attention, and ultimately, the power that comes with it." The room went silent as everyone absorbed Andrew's words. Emma's heart pounded. She thought back to the night it all began, replaying every moment in her mind. Could it really have been orchestrated? And if so, by whom? Before she could ask, a voice called out from the back of the room. "I think I can answer that." All eyes turned to a woman stepping forward, her presence commanding yet calm. She looked familiar, but Emma couldn't place her. The woman wore a sharp blazer and carried a sleek briefcase, her demeanor exuding confidence. "I'm Sarah," the woman announced, locking eyes with Emma. "I'm a journalist, but not the kind who just chases headlines. I investigate the stories behind the stories. The ones no one wants to talk about." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And I've been following this one from the start." Emma's breath caught. "You know who's behind this?" Sarah nodded. "I do. But it's complicated. The person who filmed you wasn't working for themselves. They were hired by a third party, someone who wanted to expose not just you, but the broader issue of food waste and corporate negligence. However, their methods were questionable." Emma's confusion deepened. Why go to such lengths? If they cared about the issue, why not approach it directly? "Because," Sarah explained, "direct approaches don't get the same traction. Controversy does. Viral videos do. They wanted a story that would ignite public outrage and force the company's hand. And they succeeded. But here's the twist, they didn't anticipate the fallout. They didn't think you'd become the face of a story. And now they're scrambling to control the narrative." Emma felt a mix of anger and disbelief. She had been a pawn in someone else's game. Her simple act of kindness turned into a weapon for someone else's agenda. "Who is it?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. "Who is behind this?" Sarah hesitated, glancing at Andrew, who gave her a small nod. "It's a non-profit organization," she revealed. "One that advocates for better food distribution policies. They've done good work in the past, but in this case, they crossed a line. They hired a freelance videographer to capture your actions, knowing it would spark a conversation about food waste. But they didn't account for the personal cost to you." The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Emma's mind raced. She had always supported efforts to reduce food waste and help those in need, but this? It felt manipulative, like her kindness had been weaponized for a cause she hadn't agreed to champion. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice firm but laced with uncertainty. Andrew stepped forward. "Now we make sure the truth comes out. The organization will have to answer for their actions, but more importantly, we need to shift the focus back to the real issue, helping people and addressing food waste. This isn't just about you, Emma. It's about starting a larger conversation." Emma nodded, feeling a spark of determination. She had been thrust into the spotlight against her will, but maybe she could use it to make a difference. "I want to speak out," she said. "I want people to know what really happened and why it matters." The crowd erupted in applause, their support overwhelming. But just as the tension began to ease, Sarah spoke again, her tone cautious. "There's one more thing you should know." Emma turned to her, bracing herself for whatever was coming next. "The videographer," Sarah said slowly. "They've been trying to contact you. They claim they didn't know the full extent of what they were getting involved in. They want to meet." Emma's stomach dropped. The person who had filmed her, the one who had unknowingly set this entire chain of events in motion, wanted to talk? She wasn't sure if she could face them, but deep down she knew she had to. The room buzzed with anticipation as Emma weighed her options. This wasn't the resolution she had expected, but maybe it was the one she needed. Taking a deep breath, she met Sarah's gaze. "Set it up," she said. "I'll meet them." The final twist hung in the air as the crowd dispersed, leaving Emma to prepare for the confrontation that would change everything. The story wasn't over yet. Emma sat quietly in the small cafe where the meeting had been arranged. The air felt thick with anticipation, and the soft hum of conversation from other patrons did little to calm her nerves. She fiddled with the edge of her jacket, glancing at the door every few seconds. The videographer was late. Each passing moment stretched the tension tighter, and she couldn't help but wonder what they would say, or if they would even show up at all. Just as she was about to lose hope, the door opened, and a young man walked in, scanning the room hesitantly. He was in his early 20s, with an unassuming demeanor and a camera bag slung over one shoulder. His eyes landed on Emma, and he gave a small, almost apologetic wave before making his way over. "Emma," he said softly, his voice tinged with guilt. "I'm Jake. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Emma nodded, gesturing for him to sit. She studied his face as he took the chair across from her. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with the strap of his bag. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. "I'm sorry," Jake finally blurted out, breaking the silence. "I didn't know what I was getting into. When they hired me, they told me it was just a documentary project about food waste. They said they wanted to highlight the good and the bad, to show people the truth. I had no idea it would turn into this." Emma leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Why did you film me? Why didn't you ask me what I was doing or tell me what this was for?" Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't think about it at the time. I was following instructions. They told me to capture moments that felt real and impactful. When I saw you giving the food to those kids, it felt like exactly what they were looking for. I thought it was a positive story, something that would inspire people. But when the video went viral, and I saw how it affected you, I realized I'd made a huge mistake." Emma's expression softened slightly, though the hurt lingered in her eyes. "Do you know what it's been like for me? Losing my job, being thrown into the spotlight, having my life turned upside down, all because of a video I didn't even know was being made." Jake nodded, his face etched with regret. "I know. And I'm so sorry. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can do now is try to make it right." Emma let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing a fraction. She could see the sincerity in Jake's eyes, but the damage had already been done. Still, holding on to anger wouldn't change the past. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked, her tone firm but not unkind. Jake straightened, his expression resolute. "I've already reached out to the organization that hired me. I told them they need to come forward and take responsibility for their actions. And I want to help you share your side of the story. If you're willing, I can use my platform to make sure people know the full truth about what happened to you, about food waste, and about the kids you were trying to help." Emma considered his offer. It was risky, putting herself out there even more, but she also knew it could be an opportunity to reclaim the narrative. She nodded slowly. "All right, but this time we do it on my terms." Over the next few days, Emma worked with Jake and Sarah to craft a video that told the whole story, from the moment she decided to help the kids to the fallout she experienced after the video went viral. They included statistics about food waste, stories from homeless families, and examples of policies that could make a difference. Emma spoke candidly about her struggles, her regrets, and her hopes for a better system, one that prioritized compassion over rigid rules. When the video was finally released, it garnered immediate attention. The public response was overwhelming, but this time it was different. Instead of judgment, Emma received messages of support and gratitude. People shared their own stories of helping others, of challenging unfair rules, and of finding ways to reduce food waste in their communities. The conversation had shifted from controversy to change. Even the organization that had orchestrated the original video came forward, issuing a public apology and pledging to work more transparently in the future. They reached out to Emma privately, offering to support her in any way they could. While she was still wary of their motives, she saw an opportunity to collaborate on meaningful initiatives, ensuring that her experience wouldn't be in vain. As the weeks passed, Emma found herself embracing her newfound role as an advocate. She partnered with local shelters and food banks, using her voice to raise awareness about the issues she had stumbled into. The boy from that night, whose name she now knew was Daniel, became a frequent visitor at her events, often helping her hand out meals or organize donations. His quiet resilience continued to inspire her, reminding her why she had taken that risk in the first place. One evening, as Emma was preparing for a community meeting, she received an email from her former manager at McDonald's. She hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. The message was brief but heartfelt. They acknowledged the impact her actions had made and invited her to a meeting with regional leadership to discuss potential changes to their policies on food waste. It wasn't a guarantee of change, but it was a start. Emma smiled as she closed her laptop, feeling a sense of closure she hadn't thought possible. The journey had been painful and messy, but it had also been transformative. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something much larger, a movement that was already making a difference. That night, as Emma stood in front of a packed room filled with community members, activists, and volunteers, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the people who had supported her, for the lessons she had learned, and for the chance to turn her struggles into something meaningful. As she looked out at the faces in the crowd, she realized that the story wasn't really about her. It was about all of them, about what they could achieve together when they chose compassion over indifference, action over apathy. And as she began to speak, sharing her journey once more, Emma knew this was just the beginning.